Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, today we're really getting into something fundamental, managing behavior. Something everyone struggles with, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to look at why the usual ways often just don't work.
Yeah, the standard approaches.
Especially for kids, maybe adults too, who've dealt with early stress or trauma. Why those methods seem to consistently fall flat.
Yeah, and we're diving deep specifically into the work of Bryan Post here. It's about a real paradigm shift in thinking.
Big one.
And while a lot of his work started maybe focused within adoption and foster care communities.
Right, that's where you often hear about it?
He's really clear this isn't just niche. It's fundamentally about human behavior. Universal stuff based on, solid classical neuroscience and stress research.
Okay, so it applies across the board.
Absolutely. Every single person.
And the core message then, the mission for us today, it really comes down to this quote from Bryan Post, doesn't it?
It does. It's powerful.
Stop focusing on behavior. Start understanding the stress underneath it. That's a whole game changer right there.
It really is. It forces you, to look beneath the surface.
Yeah.
Get past the judgment.
And replace it with, what, physiology?
Pretty much. Understanding what's actually happening in the body and brain.
Okay, let's unpack that straight away.
Yeah.
Because I can hear listeners thinking, that sounds nice, but impossible. Kids throwing a plate, someone's yelling. You have to deal with the behavior. So how does knowing it comes from stress actually help in that moment?
Well, it helps because it instantly redefines what's possible in that moment. Bryan Post's foundation is all behavior comes from stress.
Okay.
So when a person, kid or adult, doesn't matter, is dysregulated by stress, they literally lose access to their higher brain functions.
This thinking brain just goes offline.
Exactly. Rational thought, logic, even feeling securely connected. It's just not available. The brain's running on survival mode. Pure stress response.
Okay, so the state they're in makes certain interactions impossible. That puts a huge focus on the environment and the relationship.
Definitely. And this connects to a really key distinction Bryan Post highlights, drawing from early pioneers like Kinnell and Claus.
Attachment versus bonding.
Yes. We tend to use those terms like they're the same thing.
Interchangeably, yeah.
But they're absolutely not. Kinnell and Claus were really clear about the difference. It's crucial.
So break that down for us.
Okay, so attachment. That's the child's behavior towards the parent. Seeking closeness, comfort, safety. It's what the child does.
Right.
Bonding, on the other hand, is the parent's behavior towards the child. The care, the presence, the nurturing from the adult. It's a two-way street, but different directions.
Got it. Attachment, child to parent. Bonding, parent to child.
Exactly. And here's the kicker for Bryan Post's model. Secure attachment, that healthy child-to-parent connection. It can only happen in a regulated, low-stress environment. Meaning if the parent, the caregiver, is stressed out, dysregulated themselves.
They can't provide that safe harbor.
Precisely. They can't be fully present. They don't have the emotional bandwidth, the patience, whatever you want to call it, to help the child co-regulate.
So the adult stress directly blocks the child's ability to form secure attachment.
That's the argument. Bryan Post says secure attachment simply cannot form if the adult is stressed because that essential two-way regulation process is broken. The adult side isn't holding up its end.
Wow. Okay. That immediately shifts the focus, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Away from just fixing the child's behavior.
Completely.
And onto the adult state. So if stress is the root and the adult's regulation is key, we have to ask, why did some of those older therapies, the ones developed specifically for attachment issues, why did they seem to make things worse sometimes?
Right. And Bryan Post really dug into this history. Of course, you have the foundational work, Bowlby, Mary Ainsworth, the absolute classics of attachment theory.
The bedrock.
Yeah. And Bryan Post sees researchers like Alan Shore today as kind of the modern Bowlby, doing that deep, complex attachment work.
But alongside that, in the 90s especially, there was this whole branch focused on RAD, reactive attachment disorder.
Exactly. And that led down some paths that Bryan Post now views as, problematic because they were high-stress approaches.
Really? Like what?
Well, think about two major figures he discusses. Foster Cline, many know him from Love and Logic with Jim Fay.
Sure, very popular.
But his earlier work on consciousless children was much more intense. And then there was Martha Welch, who developed Holding Time.
Holding time. That sounds gentle, like holding a child.
Well, the name sounds gentle, but the practice could be quite intense. But here's a critical historical connection Bryan Post found really revealing.
Okay.
Foster Cline's therapeutic approach. It was derived from work by a psychiatrist named Zaslow. And Zaslow's therapy was called rage reduction therapy.
Rage reduction.
And get this, it was originally developed for severely disturbed adult psychiatric patients.
Right.
Specifically, adults diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Wait, what? You're taking something for adult schizophrenia and applying it to children with trauma?
That was Bryan Post's reaction too. Huge red flag, right? And initially, he himself was a big proponent of Welch's holding time methods. He traveled, did intensive.
He believed in it.
He did. But then he started noticing something wasn't sticking. The kids might respond during the intensive work, but back home, the changes weren't lasting, the families were still struggling.
Why not? If holding time was about connection.
Because, as Bryan Post came to realize, the underlying aim often became about breaking through the child's resistance. It was about controlling the behavior, suppressing the outburst, changing the child by force, essentially.
Ah, okay. So even if it looked like connection, the intent was still focused on stopping the behavior.
Right. And that led to his big insight. These historical therapies, even the ones meant to help attachment, often failed because they were, and this is his quote, based in practices that generated more stress for an already stressed out child.
Wow. So they were literally pouring fuel on the fire.
Exactly. Using stress, even implicitly, as a tool to get compliance, which just reinforced the child's internal state of fear and threat rather than addressing it. It taught them their behavior was bad, not that their distress needed soothing.
It invalidated their internal experience.
Precisely. Aiming at the behavior fed the underlying fear.
Okay, that leads us perfectly into the brain science bit. The amygdala, fear, and this trap we all fall into as adults.
Yes. Bryan Post simplifies things powerfully here. He suggests there are really only two primary emotions driving everything.
Which are?
Love and fear. Simple as that. And fear is the engine of the stress response.
Okay, so when fear gets triggered, the child acts out, maybe disrespects you, melts down. What happens in the brain?
And the amygdala lights up. That's our ancient threat detector, right? The lizard brain, as some call it.
Sees the behavior as a threat to
Whoa.
order, safety, control.
All of the above. It perceives a crisis. And once the amygdala flags something as a threat, it triggers this incredibly strong compulsive urge to do three things. This is Bryan Post's CSC acronym.
CSC. Okay, what does that stand for?
Control the behavior, suppress the behavior, change the behavior.
Just control, suppress, change. CSC.
Yes. The instant you feel that urge to CSC, to shut it down, make it stop, force compliance. That is your signal.
I signal that.
That you are operating from your own stress response. Your own fear has been triggered by the behavior. You're not in your calm, rational, connecting brain anymore. You're in your amygdala.
That's incredibly clarifying. It's like a personal dashboard light. If I'm trying to CSC my kid or spouse or coworker, it means I'm stressed. I'm acting out of fear.
Exactly. It's the immediate check. Forget judging their behavior for a second. Check your own state. Are you trying to CSC? If yes, regulate yourself first. That's the priority.
Yeah, it requires a massive mental shift.
Huge. And Bryan Post uses a great analogy to explain just how big this shift needs to be. He compares it to the way AI, like ChatGPT, changed how we approach writing.
Okay, how so?
Before AI got really good, if you needed to write something, your first thought was probably, okay, got to sit down, outline, draft, the traditional process.
That'll run work, too.
Now, for many tasks, your immediate next thought is, I should just ask ChatGPT. It's faster, often smarter for certain things. It's a completely different starting point.
A new default pathway in the brain.
Exactly. And Bryan Post says we need that same kind of radical change in our default reaction to behavior. The old default, when you see or feel negative behavior, is to judge it, analyze it, try to fix it, try to CSC it. The new default thought, the immediate next thought Bryan Post wants us to have is, they're stressed. Or maybe even more accurately sometimes.
I'm stressed.
Yes, I'm stressed because my reaction to their behavior, my urge to CSC, is coming from my own triggered fear state. Their stress is triggering my stress.
It bypasses all the blame and morality stuff.
Completely. Straight to the physiology. What's happening in the nervous system, theirs and mine.
Okay, this is making sense. Let's go even deeper now into the mechanics. Why does focusing on stress work? Talk about memory, and why Bryan Post insists the real healing has to be nonverbal.
Right. So, first key concept. Stress causes regression. Physiological regression.
Meaning?
When we get significantly stressed, and this is true for adults just as much as kids, our brains literally revert to operating from earlier developmental stages. We lose access to our more mature coping skills.
So you might be dealing with a teenager, But in that moment of high stress, you're actually interacting with the emotional state of a much younger child.
That's exactly it. And when someone's dysregulated, that regressed state becomes their entire reality. They can't just snap out of it or access their older self's abilities.
Which explains why yelling, lecturing, reasoning, trying to impose logical consequences, it all just bounces off.
Totally useless, because the part of the brain you're trying to talk to, the thinking, logical part, it's offline, swamped by stress chemicals.
Okay, so how does memory fit into this?
Bryan Post uses a hierarchy of memory model to show where the problem lies and also where the solution is. Think of it like layers.
Layers of memory.
Yeah. At the very top, the most recently developed, you have cognitive memory, left hemisphere stuff, facts, data, logic, reasoning.
The thinking brain's memory.
Right. But what happens under stress? Cortisol floods the system. It particularly impacts the hippocampus. Think of it as the brain's librarian for facts and conscious memories.
And cortisol shuts it down.
Pretty much overwhelms it. Bryan Post says thinking becomes confused and distorted. You literally can't think straight or access those cognitive memories effectively. So appealing to logic in that moment, pointless.
Okay, so cognitive memory is out the window during stress. What's next down?
Below cognitive is emotional memory, more right hemisphere. Recognizing faces, associating feelings with experiences or people, still relatively high level.
Yeah.
Then you get motor memory, procedural stuff, how to walk, ride a bike, drive a car, things your body knows how to do without conscious thought.
Right. Muscle memory.
Kind of, but the deepest, earliest, most fundamental level, that's state memory. This is housed way down in the brainstem and limbic system, the oldest parts of the brain.
State memory. What's stored there?
This is where the really core stuff lives. It develops incredibly early, even pre-verbally. Bryan Post explains that basic personality traits, our fundamental way of being in the world, our patterns of regulating emotion or dysregulating, that's encoded at the state level.
Wow.
But here's the crucial part for trauma and behavior. Early traumatic experiences, especially relational trauma, neglect, things experienced or even just sensed in infancy, maybe even in utero.
Like domestic violence heard from the womb.
Exactly. That kind of primal experience gets woven into the fabric of the brain at that same deep, nonverbal state level. It's not stored as a narrative story, you can tell. It's stored as a body state, a felt sense.
So trauma lives in the same place as our core personality patterns.
Right alongside them, intertwined. And guess what gets activated during moments of intense behavioral dysregulation?
The state level memory.
Bingo. That child isn't just acting out. They are re-experiencing and expressing something from that deep, nonverbal core level of their being. Their trauma state is surfacing.
Okay, so Bryan Post sees this differently. Not just as bad behavior.
He sees it as an opportunity, an incredible one, actually, because the very state where the wound is stored is now active and accessible.
But we usually try to shut it down immediately. CSC.
Exactly. Society, parents, teachers, even many therapists. We're conditioned to suppress that deep state activation because it's scary, it's intense, it looks like bad behavior. But Bryan Post argues that suppressing it prevents healing. The best chance to reach that core wound is when it's active.
So if the wound is nonverbal, stored at the state level,
Yeah.
the healing has to reach that level too.
Which means healing has to be primarily nonverbal. You can't talk someone out of a brainstem state.
So how do you engage it? How do you offer healing at that level without just causing more stress?
Through the language the brainstem understands. Safety signals. It's all about the nonverbals. Your tone of voice, soft, calm, regulated. Your eye contact, gentle, sustained, not demanding.
Body language too.
Hugely important. Open posture, not closed off or threatening. Gentle touch, but only if it's welcome and feels safe to the child, obviously. Timing and intensity matching their state without escalating it. Providing rhythm and regulation through your own calm presence.
You're basically speaking body to body, nervous system to nervous system.
That's it. You're communicating safety and regulation directly to their state level memory, bypassing the offline cognitive brain.
Okay. This paints a very different picture of how to handle difficult moments. Let's try and summarize the big takeaways from Bryan Post here.
Sure.
First, behavior equals stress. See the behavior, think stress.
Yep. It's a physiological state, not a moral failing.
Second, if you feel the urge to CSC control, suppress, change, that's your amygdala talking. It's a sign of your fear and stress.
Your cue to regulate yourself first, always.
And third, real deep healing, especially for early trauma, happens at the nonverbal state level of memory, which means interventions need to be nonverbal, focused on safety and regulation.
Exactly. You have to reach the part of the brain where the issue is actually stored.
So the most critical piece of this whole thing,
Yeah,
it really comes back to the adult, doesn't it?
absolutely, 100%. Bryan Post is incredibly clear on this. The adult must regulate themselves first. You cannot help a child co-regulate if you're dysregulated yourself.
You can't give away calm if you don't have it.
You just can't. He emphasizes that the hardest part of this work, the biggest lift, isn't figuring out the perfect technique for the child. It's the adult doing their own internal work so they don't get overwhelmed, triggered, and pulled into that CSC reaction, but the intensity of the child's distress.
It's about the adult building their own capacity to stay present and regulated while the storm is raging around them.
That's the job. Internal work first, always. And Bryan Post often references the work of researchers like Alan Struve.
So, Roof, yeah, on long-term development.
Right. And Streif's work showed beautifully how infants who grow up in well-regulated parental systems where the parent can soothe them effectively, those infants naturally become competent self-regulators as they grow older.
Because they internalize that regulation.
They learn it through relationship. If attachment is truly, as some define it, the dyadic regulation of emotion, meaning it takes two people regulating together.
Okay, yeah.
Then the really profound, maybe uncomfortable question Bryan Post leaves us with is this.
Elaine.
What unresolved, unprocessed, unexpressed grief or stress or trauma are we carrying around as adults? What's buried in our state-level memory?
Because that's what's preventing us from being that regulated presence for others.
Exactly. What baggage are we carrying that blocks us from showing up, staying calm, and truly connecting in a way that allows co-regulation and healing for our kids, our partners, ourselves? That unresolved history in us, that might be the biggest obstacle.
Wow, that's definitely something to think about. A lot to mull over there.